Okay, so what if we could apply a rock-solid concept from engineering to something as complex and, messy as the human mind? We're going to dive into a new way of thinking about mental resilience, not as something you just hope you have, but as something you can actually build by design. This is really cool stuff, so let's jump right in. All right, so it all kicks off with a really basic question from the world of engineering. When we build a massive bridge or a skyscraper, how do we actually make sure it doesn't just fall down? I mean, it has to handle everyday traffic, sure, but what about a hurricane or an earthquake? The secret is this kind of hidden buffer they build right in.
Yeah, so engineers have a name for this safety factor. And it's basically just a simple formula. You take a structure's absolute breaking point, its maximum possible strength, and you divide that by the normal everyday load it's expected to handle. So that bridge you drive over every day, it isn't just strong enough. No way. It's engineered to be way stronger than it'll ever likely need to be. That extra strength, that's its safety factor. So it really gets you thinking, what if our minds had something just like that?
And that is exactly where this idea of a mental safety factor comes in. We're literally taking that concept from the world of steel and concrete and applying it to our own inner world, our psychology. The goal? To build a safety buffer, but for your mind. So here's the formula from the research, and it's actually beautiful in its simplicity. The mental safety factor, let's call it MSF, is your coping capacity divided by your psychological load. Now, coping capacity, that's everything you've got in your tank, right? Your energy, your resilience, your friends, a good night's sleep. And psychological load, well, that's all the stuff weighing you down. The deadlines, the worries, the daily pressures, all of it. Okay, so everything hinges on this one magic number, 1. If your MSF is greater than 1, you're golden. You're in the safe zone. It means you have more resources in your toolkit than the stress you're dealing with requires. You've got a buffer. But if that number dips below 1, that's a warning sign. You're approaching your limit. The load you're carrying is starting to overwhelm your ability to cope, and that's when things get risky. So, to really get a handle on what happens when we get close to that limit, this whole framework borrows another brilliant idea from engineering. It's this analogy between stress and strain, and it helps us literally map out our mind's potential breaking points. Okay, check this out. This is where it gets really visual and kind of clicks. This graph basically turns all those abstract feelings into something you can see. So up the side, on the vertical axis, you've got stress. That's the psychological load we talked about. And along the bottom, that's strain, which is your response to all that stress. Now, follow that line from the start. See how it's straight at the beginning? That's called the elastic region. Think of this as your everyday stress. A tough day at work, a tight deadline, you feel stretched for sure. But once it's over, you bounce right back. No harm, no foul. But if that stress keeps piling on, you eventually hit what's called the yield point. This is a huge deal. It's the absolute limit of your normal coping ability. It's the tipping point where stress stops being temporary and starts to cause real lasting changes. Because once you go past that point, you're in the plastic region. Here, the changes stick around. Now, this isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes this is where post-traumatic growth happens. But it's also the zone where things like chronic burnout, anxiety, or even PTSD can take root. You don't just bounce back to normal from here. The experience fundamentally changes you. And if the load just keeps getting heavier and heavier, you reach the end of the line, fracture. In engineering, it's simple. The material snaps. For us, psychologically, this is a mental breakdown. It's the point where the whole system just gets overwhelmed. And this table just nails the comparison, right? It puts it all side by side. Engineering stress, that's our perceived pressure. Strain, that's our emotional response. The yield point becomes the onset of burnout, and fracture is a full-on mental breakdown. And look, it even includes fatigue, which in our world is that slow burn burnout you get from tons of little stresses piling up over and over again. Okay, so this whole model feels really intuitive, right? It just kind of makes sense. But it also brings up a massive question, and that leads us right into our next section. How on earth do we take this from a cool concept into something we can actually, measure, right? I bet that's exactly what you're thinking. How do you slap a number on something as vague as coping capacity or mental load? It sounds impossible.
But here's the thing, our bodies are giving off signals, generating data all the time. And it turns out we can get surprisingly close to an answer by looking at that data. Researchers use what are called psychophysiological markers, basically clues from your body, things like your heart rate variability or HRV, which can give us a hint about how well you're regulating your emotions, or EEG scans that show brain patterns linked to resilience. We can even measure cortisol, the famous stress hormone. You combine those biological signals with what people actually report feeling, and suddenly you can get a pretty solid data-driven picture of both your mental load and your capacity to handle. And this is where it gets really, really exciting. Because if we can measure it, we can manage it. This whole framework could totally change the game for mental health, flipping the script from just reacting to problems to actually getting ahead of them, being proactive. Just look at this simulation here. This shows someone's mental safety factor over a period of time. See how as the stress piles on and their coping capacity, maybe from bad sleep or just constant pressure, starts to drop, that blue line heads straight down. It's trending toward that critical red line, that point where the MSF hits 1. The incredible thing is, this could give us a heads up before we hit the breaking point. It's like an early warning system for your mind. And that's when the real-world potential just explodes. I mean, think about it. Imagine companies actually designing jobs and workflows to keep their employees in a healthy MSF range. Or picture a doctor getting an alert that a patient's MSF is trending downwards so they can intervene early. Or even better, your own smartwatch buzzing and telling you, hey, your resilience is low, maybe it's time for a break, before you even feel close to burning out. The researchers put it perfectly in their paper, and I'm quoting here, "This could transform how we approach stress-related disorders, shifting the paradigm from reactive to preventative care." And really, that's the whole point, to stop waiting for people to break and start reinforcing the structure long before it's ever in danger. So I'll just leave you with this final thought. We live in an age where what gets measured gets managed, right? We track our steps, we track our sleep, our heart rate. So what if we could add resilience to that list? If you could have a little dashboard for your mind, showing you your mental safety factor in real time, would you want to look? It's a pretty big question to think about for the future of our own health.